everybody, it is Romania Black, and we are on episode 18 of 86. So I gotta get my numbers right, 18 to 86. And yeah, so guess what? Surprising no one, our crew's been sent on another suicide mission. It's like, it's just the remix. It's like San Magnolia's Legion, the Jihad remix. And so, yeah, we've seen a little bit more of Sheen the last few episodes. It's stuff we already knew, but we are seeing it of him, which I am glad. I feel like it's good to get validation in a series when you're like, I think this character is acting this way, and they're thinking this, and then you see them exhibit that and you're like, oh, okay, cool. I am curious. I know this is a very long running series. Like this whole season only covers volumes 1 through 3 of the light novel. And they're on like volume 12 or so of the light novel. So I'm sure that Sheen's character will develop. So I was trying to think back on that because I've given Sheen's character a hard time this season because I'm like, he just kind of isn't going anywhere as a character. He's experiencing things, but I'm just like, I feel like his character starts out one way in episode 1 and he's still the same by episode 18. But I was thinking about it at this point and I feel like, okay, well, he's a character in a long running series, right? So I feel like I should give him a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt that maybe his character is going to go on a journey and characters need to go on journey in steps. So maybe season 1 will be step 1 for Sheen's character. Right? So I do think that I've been a little bit unfair to him. And so I do think that I should give Sheen a little bit more benefit of the doubt that maybe at the end of the season, it'll be like step 1 of character development, maybe for Sheen. And then if they do future seasons of the anime, he'll get further development, which would be interesting. One thing that I was kind of sad about was that I'm back to kind of looking at comments and I'm sort of like, whatever at this point. I obviously don't want major spoilers, of course, but somebody in the comments was like, yeah, the novels don't really expand on that uncle. And I'm like, why, what do we do? Because I was really hoping novels 1 through 3 in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, maybe that uncle that I absolutely loathed in episode 16 and have loathed this entire season. I'm like, maybe I'm just missing stuff the novel doesn't bring up. And then this person in the comments was like, yeah, they don't talk about him in the novel. And I was like, so yeah, I guess there's no, and people are like, well, here's my headcanon here. I'm like, you can give me all the headcanons you want. I want a show to give me proof. And if you don't, then what a useless character. And my thing is, they were just, I'm not even going to talk anymore about the uncle. I'll go on a tangent. It'll last 10 minutes. I'm done with him. But with the moment they said that in the comments, I was like, all right, so I don't have to worry about him. Okay, sure. But yeah, I have really enjoyed the last few episodes of this series. I'm very interested in seeing how we take on this seemingly impossible task of facing Legion. But if episode 9 has showed us anything, the 5 of them will probably be just fine. The 5 of them are going to go through. We'll just need the 5 of them, that's it, to handle this impossible odds scenario, and they'll somehow pull it out with anime magic, and it'll be perfectly fine. It is what it is. I'm fine with that at this point. And I'm sure a lot of people will be like, well, you like shows like Mob Psycho where it's like one character versus the world. I'm like, yes, but that series establishes fantasy magical elements very early on. And you kind of, your suspended disbelief from episode 1. There's a literal ghost walking around. Anytime a show has a lot of realism and they're trying to be like, take me serious. I'm a serious, realistic war story show. But then 5 people go Avengers style and take out an entire army. I'm like, like, are you a realistic war story? Sure. But we did talk about back in episode 16 that they did have the Jihad Confederacy doing something. The show just didn't seem to show us that for reasons. So I like poking fun at this show at this point. I've kind of accepted that it's just like a campy, okay show, and I'm okay with it. It tries real hard to do a lot of things, and I enjoy it. But I'm getting to the point where I can't quite take it seriously because it is like so heavy-handed and over the top and being like, yes, we're a serious show with symbolism. And I'm like, you are. Okay. But I am enjoying myself at this point. I think not taking it seriously is allowing me to enjoy it far more than if I was seriously critically evaluating this epic sprawling series. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe the novels, maybe I'm just in the baby program, the baby preface, the prologue, and it's gonna get real good as soon as which it is good. I say that. If I didn't enjoy this show, I would stop watching and tell you all like garbage, don't want to watch it ever again. But I am really enjoying this show. It's just the comparisons of when I started the show and I was like, oh, this is a very serious, deep, dedicated show. And people were like, yes, this is the best thing in the world. It's the most serious Oscar-winning, show. And then the more I get into it, I'm like, it's not exactly my bag, the way the elements that it focuses on in terms of fiction, but I'm enjoying myself with it, but I don't take it incredibly seriously. So I feel like poking fun at it is a good time because I feel like plain Jane from Drag Race. I'm just going to poke fun at it and then just at the end of the day be like, well, that was fun. So hopefully you all enjoy that. And I'm sorry to the people that take this show dead serious. Everyone has their cups of tea. I like shows that I'm sure no one takes seriously at all. But that's kind of the fun of it, It's good to step out of my comfort zone and watch a show that I'm like, all right, we'll do this. It's good. I am enjoying myself, but no one's really talking about this show on the Discord anymore at all. So it's like, I'm just talking to myself about it. And if I'm going to talk to myself about it, I'm going to be amused. And if I'm going to be amused, I'm just going to talk shit and have fun. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. But yeah, so at this point, I'm like, let's just do the damn thing. So I'm excited for this episode. I hope you all are too. We're just going to get started with episode 18 and see what happens. So we're going to start episode 18 of 86, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do this. Okay. So this was a good episode. There was a lot I liked about this episode. There were a lot of like one-liners, and Wentzel's character. I really like Wentzel's character a lot. She has gotten some really interesting development over the course of this season that I'm like, yes, please. I want to know more, please. And there's like actually some mystery set up about her that's really intriguing. That I'm like, I really like that. It makes me want to know more about her. Because they set up some things that I'm like, okay, well, what else do we got? So we're gonna go through this episode. There are some things I talked about this earlier in the season, but I think that it becomes very apparent with this series in particular. As compared to other series, that this is based off of a light novel and not a manga or a visual graphic novel. And some series you can't really tell that. Like Violet Evergarden, watching Violet Evergarden, you wouldn't know it's based off a light novel. You wouldn't, because the way that they do the storytelling, the way they focus on the character, the way they do the nuanced expressions, and the way that Violet Evergarden does a lot of showing, not telling. Sometimes this series runs into the idea of it tells us many things without just showing us. And I think the reason for that is they don't have anything to show us because it's based on what's written in a book. So all they have is exposition. And the series is like, well, I could maybe demonstrate this. And I'm going to talk about a few instances in this episode because my wheels were turning in my head when I was watching this, being like, well, they could have done that. And they didn't do it. But there are some moments where I'm like, you could show your audience something, but instead they just come out and just tell us and just in black and white say it. But we'll talk about that. The president gives me simultaneously, at times he reminds me of the Sultan from Aladdin, where he's just like so like congenial and like, oh, ha, 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 we're just these 86. Don't worry, guys, we're gonna get you out of this war and readjust you into civilian life. And then there's other times where he's like the Wizard of Oz. And again, he has like green glasses, so maybe that's, supposed to be something where it's like the emerald green glasses is it alluding to the fact that he's like the Wizard of Oz? Here's the thing, the Wizard of Oz is full of shit. Like, that's the thing. The Wizard of Oz it's like pulling back the curtain and seeing beyond the illusion, and you realize the Wizard of Oz basically knows nothing what they're doing. They come across as this omnipotent being that knows everything, that gives Dorothy and her friends these tasks, and then you find out he's just full of shit and he was just there on technicality and doesn't really know what he's doing. So I don't exactly think the president is like the Wizard of Oz in terms of that, but I do think that the president puts on this front of, yeah, sure, all these idealistic things. And yes. And maybe he does believe some of it. Like, do I think that he genuinely wants them to integrate back into society? Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Do I think that he's, as congenial and nice as he lets on? No, he literally said if they don't come back alive, he's going to destroy the world. And that's such a weird generic phrase. I'm like, are you just saying that you love them so much you'll burn the world down if they don't come back? But why? You've known them for 5 months, but why? So there is still some mystery about his character that I'm very intrigued about. And I want to see if he ends up being like Oz, like the great and powerful Oz, or if he ends up being more like the Sultan from Aladdin. Like, is it an illusion? Does he have a persona, or is this how he actually is? Is he actually this congenial? And that's kind of been the question since episode 12, because everyone in the military there respects him, and they don't question him, even as idealistic as he can be. They kind of just let it go. And I'm like, is that because he's the president? They don't want to, it's a authoritative figure you don't, go against, or what? What is the case? So the president makes me very intrigued. I'm intrigued by his character. So then we have this one guy. We don't know who he is, but he is one guy that was talking about the fact that he thought they should just, go to their death. This is so fascinating to me, because they're like, isn't this a year late attempt at a disinfection? The year late thing is interesting. So I'm like, were they plotting to get rid of the 86 as well? And now it's just so convenient that they're there. And he's like, because have they been there a year? Has it really been a year since they've been there? Has it? I guess it has. Oh my God. Yeah. That's weird. I'm just now realizing I'm like a year late attempt. These characters have been there for a year. It feels like they've been there for 4 weeks. Like, what? No, that's another thing too. That's so weird to me. That's so bizarre to me. Usually a series, if they're going to do a time skip, it's like several years, but it's after you've spent an exuberant amount of time getting to know the characters over the course of weeks and months. And then they do like a time skip. Here, it just kind of happens. And they're like, yeah, we've been here a year. And I'm like, what? That's so bizarre to me. Because Lena, here's kind of the thing too with that. Lena was only with them for a couple months. And I feel like they had like major attitude shifts towards Lena, and they kind of like revealed things to her. And we got like the character development that we have had happened in that short span of time. And now like a year has passed, but I'll be honest, as far as like character work goes, and it's probably my biggest complaint about 86, they don't do a whole lot like in terms of in-depth development. Like Anju and Theo, what have they done the last year? They ain't done jack shit. Their characters have been like stagnant. And there's been like no development with Karina, with Anju, with Theo. They are just there. They're just like, they say one-liners and they're just like, I didn't get sleep today. Like that was Theo's whole purpose this episode, was to say, I didn't have sleep, and wow, this is scary. Who did this crazy thing? But that's like the most lines he's had, like, and I don't know when. It just doesn't make them as memorable to me. Like Raiden, yeah, I like Raiden a lot. His characters had things to do with Sheen, and Sheen is our main character, so you would hope that he's memorable. But I keep wanting more out of their characters, and it's just like they're there. They are there. There's nothing really. We don't get any insights into what they're thinking. We don't get any insights into like what are they wanting to do if they go back. What are they thinking? It's just kind of like, it's like you're playing dolls and they're just sitting there and you're like, okay, well, they're there. They have distinctive features, but I want to know more about what they think about all of this. Like, you've been there a year. What do you think about the Confederacy? What do you think about the military? They talked back in episode 17, last episode, in the mess hall. They did talk a little bit about it, but it was like a 2-minute conversation. And I'm like, I just keep expecting more, and it's just what it is, I guess. But yeah, so we'll get back to the topic at hand, because I'm starting to deviate. But the idea of the disinfection, the amazing thing about this is kind of a little bit of the hypocrisy, and I don't know if it's meant to be intentional or if the author is aware of it. I'm assuming they're aware of it because this is a ongoing series, but I'm like, surely they're aware of this, that there's this major hypocrisy here, because they're like, you just wanted to send the 86 to their death. And I'm like, that's exactly what San Magnolia wanted to do. And the sergeant's like, oh, well, I'm like, but that's what you wanted to do. And then he's like, there's no way those 5 children can break through the Legion controlled territory. And I'm like, oh, sir, you don't know how anime works. These 5 are going to break through. Although I was thinking about this during the credits. I was like, we're on episode 18. We have 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. We have 5 episodes left, which seems like a lot of material left to get through. And they're, 9 minutes away from the base where the Morphos are. I'm like, if we arrive at the Morphos next episode, what are we going to do for 3 episodes worth of content? That's going to be the case. Do I think that they can fill it with content? Oh yeah, sure. Absolutely. But I'm like, obviously there's got to be some hurdles come in the way that will impact along the way. And I feel like there's stuff we're going to cling back to, like the conversation with Sheen and Frederica gets cut off this episode, and we don't really get to see how it ends up playing out. We don't even see Frederica. So whatever she's planning on doing, we don't know. But I like they have this conversation, and some officer said when we took them in that we should execute them, and you were one of them. So is this just, you trying to finish off what you said? I'm like, the Jihad, I'm glad that Wentzel is self-aware enough to tell them, she's like, oh, we're not perfect. We're not a utopia. And I'm like, thank you. Because the beginning when we saw him, it kind of seems like that way, but it's, too good to be true. But she does say, she's like, no one here wants you to die. And I'm like, the opening scene of this episode reveals that, yes, there are people here that want them to die. Very much so. And Wentzel may have rose-colored glasses on. And she's like, oh no, her and the president may be like, oh no one wants you to die. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure this dark-haired guy wants them to die. I'm pretty sure this guy with the mustache that wanted to, exterminate them wanted them to die. I'm pretty sure that's what exterminate means. So I'm like, yeah, no, there's a lot of people in this military that do not want them there and do not care if they die. And so when she's like, everyone here wishes you'd stay alive. We're not like the Republic. I'm like, you're putting a nice little veneer on it. You guys may not be overall as bad in terms of that as the Republic, but to say you're not like them, I think that's a bit of a stretch, especially what we see in this opening scene here. And he's like, I don't want to deny you what you want to protect. This is what I was talking about. When they say here, like, I don't want to deny you what you want to protect, but this nation is built on justice. It's exposition that's just telling us certain things. And again, I hate to compare this show to other shows, but it's just the nature of when you watch multiple things, you kind of get inspired by it. I'm like, I've seen shows that can demonstrate to us that the nation's built on justice, that can tell us that you have things you want to protect. Like when he says, well, you have things you want to protect, I'm like, well, why don't we see that with this captain? Why don't we get a shot of him, like looking at a portrait of someone or doing, I'm like, this show makes symbolism up front in your face for every other scene. Why can't we do it in this scene? Why do you have to tell us that? And the reason for that is because this is based on a light novel and you have exposition, but I don't know. There are times where I wish that the show would show rather than tell. But then sometimes when it does do that, it's so, there's no Goldilocks scenario, right? I want my cake and I want to eat it too. And I want a Goldilocks scenario where it's just right. And it hasn't quite found that perfect balance yet. And that's just me nitpicking it. You all know this by now. I do like, and of course they do the roster of everybody on there. There's 5 others. We know Bernholt's one of them. There's a couple others that are on there too. I wish we got to know them, but that probably won't happen. And then, and that's only 5. We know that there's 15 altogether. So there's 5 more we don't even know about yet. But it's like, they have the little screensaver on his tablet that is the Jihad flag. So it's like, here's your symbolism, da-da. But they're like, it's not acceptable for a human to try to have his way using violence rather than using words. Again, I'm with the president and his idealism. I just don't know if everybody else in the army is on the same boat as well. I do like that the president, when he's framed talking to him, he's in the shadows and he's like smiling, like, so please do things the right way. And he's in the shadow, kind of showing this persona that he comes across as the really nice guy, but he'd probably shank you in a dark corner if you didn't do what he wanted you to. So just kind of revealing that sort of multiple personality maybe that he has. Yeah. And he's like, they're monsters. This part here was interesting too, where he's like, they're monsters created by the madness of the battlefield. I'm so fascinated by that because the 86, yes, they are. They are monsters created by the battlefield. That's all they've known. They're teenagers. I like there's this kind of duality between Wentzel, who we'll talk about her in a minute and what she represents for it. But this guy is like, well, they're monsters created by the battlefield. They'll never be able to integrate into modern civilian life. I'm like, what about your soldiers who have been on the battlefield for 9 years? Like, what? One, are their term limits that long? Do they have term limits? Are they only on the field for like 3 or 4 years and they leave and they just get a fresh new batch of recruits? It'd be nice to know that world building, unless they've told us it already in the show and I've just forgot. Maybe the novel will do that. But I was like, it's weird to me that they're suggesting one group of veterans is going to be more hostile and less likely to integrate back into society than another group of veterans. Like, that's so weird to me because I'm like, anybody that's had time on the battlefield can have difficulty adjusting back to civilian life. So it seems rather prejudiced of him to suggest that, oh, well, the 86 are monsters created by the battlefield. They just keep wanting to come back to it. I'm like, yeah, that's because they literally have nothing else to go home to because they don't have any connections to Jihad. They don't, it's like you set up a dollhouse for them being like, here, this is your new home now. And they're like, we don't know this place. We don't know. They were there for like 2 months or a month. Like, they didn't have time to settle in and adjust and find things they cared for. Like, if Anju met somebody in Jihad that she fell in love with, then that could change the whole game. Like, if she had been there a month, found somebody she cared about and was like, oh, hey, like, and they had great chemistry and stuff. I wish there were more complications like that to the story, because the whole narrative is just, they're monsters created by the battlefield and poor them. And like, look at this scenario. And while that's true, and I like what it represents, I wish it was more complicated. And like, again, Attack on Titan, you have all this character development, and there you have characters that were born on the battlefield and raised, but then they develop relationships with one another and other people, and then people from enemy lines, and it starts to expand and develop. And again, I've watched 4 seasons of that show, so that's given me time. But even in season one, you had a lot of character development in one season, and you had like things that they held on to, things that they found sacred, that created this inner conflict between fighting the Titans and desiring something else. And with the 86, they're just like, well, we've been on the battlefield our whole lives. We're never going to leave. We're going to accept our fates, and that's it. And it's like, and that's powerful in a way. But I also want it to be complicated. I want it to be a little bit more human, in the sense that we are not one-dimensional creatures. We need more. So like, if Anju had met someone and started to develop this relationship, and it started to get that way with Eugene, and then Eugene was gone in an episode, and I was like, no, you could have done something with that. Or like Theo met somebody that reminded him of his commander that he had, that, you know, looked like because Eugene kind of looks Albin a little bit. So if Theo had met somebody that reminded him of the Laughing Fox commander, and then he saw that tie, or if Raiden, you know, had found something that connected him back to Jihad, like, for right now, you get why they are totally fine with dying on the battlefield, because they don't have anything to go back to. Why would they? So, and I know some people in the comments were trying to make all of these big, elaborate concessions, and I really appreciated them. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I want something more complex with their characters, and it's all been very much like the same note. And I know I'm in season 1, and I know everybody's gonna say, well, if you wait to like light novel 9. But I'm like, I don't want to have to read 10 light novels to get to some damn development. I want you to give me stuff now to make me like hold on to these characters. And with Sheen, it was Ray, and Ray's gone. And Lena, it should be Lena, but her and him have had no interactions. And there's like there's a bare thread there, but we haven't seen anything from Lena out of this episode. And with the other 3 characters or 4 characters, there's just not anything there. So I keep wanting more, right? At least in other series, you knew a character like what were their desires, what did they want, what did they grapple with. These guys have nothing. So while that's very sentimental and you can empathize with it and sympathize with it and relate to it, it's just kind of like, well, but what am I rooting for you to get at the end of the rainbow? Like, what am I rooting for you to get when the conflict is over? That, I guess, is a big part of it too. Like, what are they going to do when the battle is over, if it's ever over? And I know that's part of the mystery, and you're kind of like, that's part of the excitement of like, well, what are they going to do? But there needs to be like something like kind of be like there, right? I don't know. We'll talk more about it as we go. But I do think the veterans versus veterans conversation is interesting. Interesting to say the least. And then they're like, are you going to be able to take them into your homeland? I'm like, and here's the thing too, they're talking about like this immigration thing. And I'm like, again, to expand upon, I'm like, okay, if there were like an entire army of 86 working with Jihad, and then you're like, okay, we have this giant group of immigrants. Are we going to be ready to integrate them into our society? What is that going to do? Because that will cause like a cultural shift. Then yeah. And maybe that's going to get to that point, because if Lena shows up with a massive army of 86 and she's like, we're here to stop Legion. And now the commander's like, oh, here's a whole mess of them. Are you going to give them asylum in your country? Then that's going to create something interesting. And maybe that will happen. That would be amazing. But as it is right now, where he's like, are you going to be comfortable having 5 people move into your town? I'm like, why? What are they going to cause? These 5 people. And he's like, they have a hit. I'm like, are they going to have their juggernauts down in Times Square, like in the middle of town at City Hall? Are they going to be like marching through City Hall in their juggernauts? I don't know. They were there for a month and didn't cause any problems. I think that's also my thing with that captain, when he's like, are you going to be able to like integrate these 5 people into our civilian life? I'm like, they were there a month and they weren't harming anything. So yeah, they should be fine. But again, if this is foreshadowing that Lena's going to show up with the whole troop of 86, and it's like, oh, well, San Magnolia turned them down. Are you guys going to be like San Magnolia? Because y'all say that you're not, and you're really against San Magnolia, so how's that going to work? Then that'll be interesting, and I'll be curious to see if that happens. That would be a very fascinating development if she shows up with all these 86 and suddenly there's an immigration crisis and it's like you have all these refugees seeking asylum, or better yet, you have 86 as well as San Magnolians who are all displaced from their country falling apart and they want to integrate into Jihad. Then that's going to become interesting itself, but we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening with that. That could be a cool development. I'm not going to hold my breath this show is going to do it, but we'll see. So let's go back past this. Now, Wentzel. I like this character development with Wentzel. Love her. Richard is the name of the military captain who's being quite the hypocrite. And she's like, oh, yes. And so we get explanation of why they split them all up. It was like 3 episodes too late, but they finally tell us. They're like, oh, yeah, you just didn't want the military to know how strong these 5 were. So you split them up so they could be strong by themselves and then come together. I'm like, what? So, I mean, I guess that makes sense. But it's like, there are some really questionable decisions made in these military, like for San Magnolia to not, they make their own questionable decisions, but for these guys to be like, we have this fighting force that can help us in the war. Let's split them up because we're afraid they'll lead a coup. And I was like, okay. I'm like, if 5 people are enough to overthrow your entire military, maybe you deserve to have a coup happen. I'm sorry. You're supposed to be this elite fighting force that's been fighting off like thousands of Legion for 9 years, but 5 teenage kids come in a Power Rangers like outfit and you guys are afraid they're going to cause a military coup and overthrow you all? What? Again, that's like such anime logic. I'm like, that would, what? No. And I know as soon as I say that would never happen in real life, somebody's going to pull up like a historical example of 5 people leading a coup. And I'm like, okay, fine. Be that way. Be that person. But it's just, it's like we have all these tanks and military, but these 5 teens and their little dog too. We got to worry about them. They're going to get the mystery machine out and kick our ass. So speaking of Wentzel, I really like that we get a little bit of mystery with her character. So clearly her character, he's like, don't get too attached. Again, we're drawing Lena comparisons about not getting attached to the 86. Even if we ever so kindly took them in, they would never forget the battlefield. I'm like, what about your veterans? Why are they different than the 86? And I thought what I wanted Wentzel to say, because she said, I don't know about that. And she said they're still in their teens. I like that she's like, they're kids. They're not used to their new environment. Like Wentzel points out a lot of really very important factual observations. She's like, they're only in their teens. Their minds still have lots of time to grow and mature. They're not used to jihad, so of course they're going to be kind of displaced here, but they're not used to our ways of doing things, so why should we expect them to just be chummy right off the bat? Yeah, they're used to the battlefield, but she's like, they might find something here that gives them meaning. And what I wanted her to say, and she didn't quite get into it, but I wanted her to be like, I was an Air Force pilot. I've not left the battlefield. I'm still here, but I'm doing it under a new environment and under a new capacity. She's like, if they choose not to leave the battlefield, why can't they become, in charge of defense? Why can't they become in charge of like a unit like you are, sir? Like, why can't they be in charge of research and development? Why this? Why not that? I was waiting for her to talk about that, and she never did. And I was like, well, she came back and fought in the military just in a different capacity. So why can't the 86? I don't know. I like Wentzel's character a lot. We do get some verification that she has a dog tag and a wedding ring. So I'm assuming it was her husband that, she lost in battle. And we see a tag, it says Vince, and it says great, and then something about blood. So it's the tags in the ring. So I'm guessing her husband or wife was lost in the battlefield. And she just keeps their memorabilia, right? And so then, of course, and I like that Richard says, you're just here trying to see what you can never get back. And she's like, so what? She's like, I'm fighting for it. Everybody fights for something, right? We're all slave to something, as a certain character from another series would say. So I do like the idea of Frederica is just constantly against this whole idea of them going to the battlefield. And when they say that the big, whatever its name is, it looks like a manta ray. I can't say the German name of it. I'm not even going to try. But she's like, well, if it's sealed, it should be left that way. I'm like, oof. Like, Frederica does not want them going into battle because she knows there's a very heavy chance that they will die or become part of Legion. It's a suicide mission. She's like, I don't like this at all. Mm-mm. And the fact that she's getting left behind and having this privilege, I do feel bad for Frederica in a sense, because I feel like she is being strung along, and she probably gets the sense that she was strung along when she was the princess or the empress, and she had to just follow and leave Kiri behind. And now, in being left behind herself, she's abandoning the 86, and she's like, no, I want to be with you all. I don't want you to leave me, because last time somebody left me, they didn't come back, and now they're part of Legion. And we'll talk about that conversation with her and Sheen in a moment. But yeah, so they have this big, giant, like, prototype plane, and that they were going to mass produce, but then the war happened and they couldn't get onto it. We also get a little bit of world building where we find out the Legion can't go underground. So that's good. And then she's like, I'm going to pilot this giant, massive space ghost coast to coast airplane that looks like a manta ray. She's like, I'm going to get here. It'll get us there faster than a helicopter. And we're just going to like zoom in. Now, is it highly convenient that where they're going has no civilian life? Snyder cut. All right, fine. Very comic book hero. I'm willing to forgive that though, because again, we've passed through a lot of abandoned populations and places so far in this story, so that makes sense. It's just a little convenient, but I do like the idea of using the distraction and the ground troops so that they can avoid Legion and get there without the Morpho being identified. I like that. And using Sheen as like a radar to like go around the Legion, that's really smart. I like that. I like that. Also, Sheen, like, at the very end when he was seeing all of the Legion and hearing all the voices, I'm like, you do remember you're supposed to avoid those, right? As they get to the Morpho, but sure. Yeah, I do also like, what's interesting is they have the little the grave goblin here out of the coffin, like, that's wandering the graveyard, and it's attached to the underside of the plane, very much like the signets and the decals on the juggernauts. That was a nice little connection. I thought that the grave, like, wanderer kind of goes along with Shinigami and Sheen's motif really well. That was well done too. So I just like Wentzel's character. She's like, oh, we'll be good. And then, if we do get some Morpho, can we win? And even if we do win, Frederica points out, we're in the middle of enemy territory. So how do we get back out? And Wentzel's like, shh, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But yeah, I get Frederica being nervous because she doesn't want to lose these people that she cares about. And her not being able to go is frustrating, right? Now, do I think that Wentzel's possibly going to die in all this? Yeah. I'm a little bit concerned for Wentzel. I think she could die. Maybe she won't. I hope she doesn't. She's like one of their biggest advocates. So I kind of hope she doesn't die, but writing's on the wall. So I want to talk about two scenes in particular. One of them being Richard, the major that was just in the darkness. I said in the reaction, he went to the Akashi from Kuroko's basketball school of doing things in the dark unnecessarily. There's a scene where he's in the dark, and then Wentzel, thank God, again, love her character. She comes in, she's like, why are you in the dark? This is dumb. And I was like, yes, girl, call it out. Because it is. It's supposed to be symbolic that he's making hard decisions. He's in the shadows. But it's like, there's no logical sense to that. Whereas for Frederica's character, she is, to our knowledge, a child, and her being in the dark is her shutting out and not wanting to think about things and isolating herself. She has like a knockoff of Madoka Magica, from what I understand of it. That poster above her bed, I know nothing about Madoka Magica, except I've seen like one still of it, but it looks like that poster. So that's all I know, and I'm probably 1,000 times wrong, but we'll see if I ever watch that show. I'll be enlightened. But for her, it makes sense why she's in the dark, and so the symbolism is very effective, right? And for the captain, I'm just glad that Wentzel called him out. So Sheen comes in and talks to her. And I like that throughout this series, that there has been comparisons to not only Kiri and Sheen, but to Sheen being a big brother to her, like Ray was a big brother to him. And he views Frederica as like a younger version of himself. So when he asks her, he's like, are you wanting to go kill Kiri? Or do you want to keep him alive? I mean, that's projecting. Like, Sheen is projecting onto her his own thoughts. Because while he wanted to put his brother to rest, I think there was a part of Sheen that was like, I also don't want to do it, right? I don't want to confront my brother, but I also want to free him. So I feel like he's saying Frederica is experiencing the same thing, and he's trying to connect to her. But she's like, I'm not you, and you're acting this way. And he's like, but I'm not Kiri either. So I like this back and forth that they have between them. And I like that he opens up the door and the light floods in. And he's like, well, you're the one who doesn't want to go. And then she's like, it should be the other way around. I should be the one to go into battle because it's me. It's Kiri. He's my knight. I should take care of him. And I like that Sheen is trying to keep her from becoming like him, from getting obsessed, but then it's kind of this weird conundrum and cycle where if he dies on the battlefield, then what is she going to do? So I almost wanted Sheen to say to her, I wanted Frederica to become to Sheen something for him to fight for, something for him to come back to. Because he doesn't even think Lena, as far as he knows, Lena's not alive at this point. So, he doesn't have any connection to her right now. But I wanted him to tell Frederica he was going to come back. I wanted him to say, I'm coming back for you. Okay? You're something that I have that I want to protect. I am going to come back. And that's how I'm different than Kiri. Because Kiri gave up and just let Legion take him. He's like, I'm going to come back to you. I promise. Because it almost seems like he wants to say something at the end when the president's like, you need to come back alive. It seemed like Sheen wanted to say something, but he was like, no, I don't want to reveal. My tsundere self doesn't want to reveal that I told Frederica that I'd come back for her. But it felt like he wanted to. So I'm very curious to see if that scene felt like there was a piece missing. And I think they're going to come back to it in a couple episodes and show us what was left unsaid. And I'm excited about that. But she's like, yeah, you guys should be the ones to go home. And he's like, I'm not going to let you take the fall. And the way that his eyes kind of twitch there, they kind of like shift a little bit, where he's like, you survived the awful battles in the 86th district. And his eyes kind of flinch there like, yeah, we survived, but you know, what was lost? And I feel like he doesn't think she understands what all those battles entailed. Like he doesn't think she gets the full scope of it, right? And then she's like, just head home. And he's like, you don't want to end up like me, do you? And I like when he turns on the light, there's like all the pictures that she's drawn of all of them. She's like, why are you telling me now that I can't chase my own ghost like you chased Ray's? Why are you telling me I can't achieve my goal? And she just like goes off on him. She's like, that having no goal, no place to call home, clinging only to pride to keep you alive is what made that pathetic ghost what he is. She's like, I don't want you to become like him because you're sounding and have been sounding a lot like Curie. And that's the thing. I want Sheen to like delve more into that and reveal what he's holding on to, if anything. But, you know, we don't get it in this scene. I do like Frederica's emotions. She's like, I don't want you to die like Curie, and I don't want any more people to die. She sounds a lot like Lena at this point too, where she's like, I don't want any more people to die, right? And I don't think Sheen does either. They're fighting this battle to stop all that. The truth is, and that's what the title of the episode is. I like they painted the ship black, and they put all the juggernauts in the little base there that they're going to be using when they get there. It's interesting that they're going to be using those little juggernaut things against the Morphos. I thought they were going to fly. I thought their whole thing was that they were going to fly, but these are like little juggernauts they're going to have. I thought they were going to be in like little aerial combat things against the Morphos, but I guess not. The one thing is that they talk about this one thing, okay? They put the juggernauts in there, and they're like talking about Frederica being locked up in her room, that she didn't want to see us off. And, you know, and Sheen, I like they all kind of look over at Sheen when Sheen's like, well, she's not going to be in the rear. She doesn't get to go. And they all kind of look at him like, okay, you don't want her to die. You're fine with her being left behind, right? And so they tell them all to get on board. And then Theo says like the one line that he hasn't slept good. He's like, normally I'd be asleep. And that just hints at what time in the morning they're leaving. They're taking Fido for reasons. I'm glad Fido's going. I'd watch a spinoff on Fido. But they go too. And then they have this one thing, though. This, like, laser beam, something that looks like it's out of Evangelion. And they're like, good luck. They're like, I hope it doesn't need to get used. Is it a laser? What is it? I'm like, and why are you hoping it doesn't need to get used? Is it something to, like, destroy them or cut them off? Again, it's one of those things. This series is notorious for it, where they say one little line and they're like, we're going to reveal it later. But you're just like, I don't know what that means. And then you're going to find out later at some point. But I'm like, why would you pack it if you hope it doesn't need to get used, unless it's like a fail-safe, like suicide thing, like like pull the plug and then kill us all, right? Interesting. Okay, so they have in there the juggernauts, the 5, and maybe there's some like stuff in the back that can fly. I don't know. I wish we could have seen them pack it up. So they do 30 minutes till mission starts. And then she's like, well, I'm a pilot. I'm the only one who ever flew it during test flights because the other Air Force pilots died. And then she's like, I'm opposed to kids like you going out to fight. But she's like, at this point, I know you guys are not going to take no for an answer. So to you, fighting to the end here is your source of pride and your identity. And the thing about it is, I think that the problem with this whole scenario is that she says something here where she's like, well, fighting to the end is your source of pride and identity. They've established in this series the whole reason they're fighting is their pride, but it's also to like avenge all of their comrades that have fallen, right? And to not let their deaths be in vain. So the thing is, at some point, there needs to be established that the fighting is going to end, and that's when they need to figure out what do they do after the fact, right? Because part of the reason they're keeping on going in battle is because they don't want to feel guilty sitting around and letting the fighting go on without them. So eventually, if the fighting stops, then that's not going to be an issue. But she's like, I'm not giving up on this either. If you're going to fight to the end, I wanted her to say this when she says, if you're going to fight to the end, then my job is to fight alongside you as well. I wanted her to say, if you're going to fight to the end, then my job is to make sure this fight ends so you don't have to fight anymore. I was expecting her to say that, and she's like, no, I'm going to fight alongside you. And I'm like, okay, good. But also we need to end the conflict. That's kind of the big point, right? And he's like, the country you finally reached is far from utopia. Here's my thing. This was my thing. My only gripe about the animation thing is when Sheena's in there and inside the Juggernaut thing or the Riken glyph, whatever, and on there they have like numbers 1 through 5. They have their 86 names. Gunslinger, Snow Witch, Laughing Fox, Werewolf, Undertaker. Why don't they have their real names? If you're trying to be different than San Magnolia and say that you recognize them as people rather than the 86, why don't you list their names? And I know somebody in the comments will say, well, that's what the 86 wanted. They wanted their nicknames to be on there. I'm like, who gives a fuck? I'd be like, no, right? I'd be like, if I was the president of Jihad, I'd be like, yes, you all can call yourselves by your names, respect, but we're not like San Magnolia. We're going to put your actual names that you seem to care about. You call each other by your actual names on the actual things instead of your fake names. That's just so weird to me, because it seems like if part of the point is that they made such a big deal to Lena about her not knowing their names, and that was like a San Magnolia thing, but then the Jihad is doing the exact same thing and just calling them by Gunslinger, Snow Witch, Laughing Fox on there, wouldn't you need to say something about that too, and how kind of hypocritical it is? Or maybe it's just an animation error and they just didn't put their actual names on there. It just, in that moment, I was like, you're being exactly like San Magnolia, just with nicer equipment. And I mean, the thing of it is, Wentzel and there are other people of the Confederacy going alongside them, which they talk about at the end of this episode. So that is something, but the hypocrisy and the prejudice is still there. And it's right out in front of them. So interesting. And then they're like, oh, they have the Jihad flag, and they're like, oh, but remember this. No one in this person wants you to die in battle. Not one person. We want you to stay alive. And I'm like, maybe in that hangar. But we know for a fact that there are people in the army that want them dead. So it's kind of a half-truth. Right? And she's like, that goes for the division commander and the rest of the unit. I'm like, oh, you sure about that, Wentzel? Are you sure about that? And then the president's like, yeah, we're going to, you guys, all this. And they basically go through the same stuff we've heard in previous episodes. And that's when he's like, my main mission is for you to come back alive. I love how Anju just goes, Anju's like response is just a smile, no matter what she thinks. Raiden gives this kind of like exhausted smirk, like, we've heard this 1,000 times. Sheen, nothing. And then Theo and Karina both look so like, really? You want us to come back alive? That's so cheesy. Okay. Like, they just have that expression. And they're like, we make no promises. And he's like, that's not good enough. You have to come back or I'm going to destroy this world. What a weird threat. Yeah. I'm like, why are you destroying this world if they don't come back? Interesting. Curious. So yeah, then we have all the tanks and stuff painted black to fade into the background. And then the battle starts and the military suffering losses. I'm a little desensitized to it at this point because we've seen the 86 go through so much that now that we're seeing the Jihad Confederacy go through it, it's like, yeah, that's what happens in this battle. Mm-hmm. One thing I do like, though, is that the 5 of them kind of comment about it. They comment about how when the signals and stuff lost, they're like, oh, wow. They're like, the Jihad is actually not retreating and are actually fighting alongside us, right? And they can hear it. They can actually hear the voices of the Confederacy fighting with them. And they're kind of like, so unlike San Magnolia, who were not on the front lines with us, who were hiding behind a screen, you do have the Confederacy sending actual troops fighting alongside them. And I want more explained. I'm sure that it will happen later on in the novels, but I'm hoping that there will be more of when this battle does end or reaches a point of stalling and kind of regression for the time being, that the 86 will have a chance to be like, wow, these people in the Confederacy actually did fight alongside us. So even though there are some bad apples that still want us dead, that we could maybe integrate with the society because they kind of understand what we've been fighting as well. It's a start. It's a start, right? But I was sad we didn't get to see Lena after the after credits. I was really hoping we'd get to see more of her. I was like, maybe, but not this episode, sadly. And then, but then they say here, they're like, just a more. And then those disgusting, but then of course, you know, they're like, we can't have all nice things. They're like, and then those disgusting 86 will win. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of sad because even though they're fighting alongside them, they still are talking about the 86 being disgusting. And I'm like, bitch, they're going to go save you all. What are you doing? Why? I mean, Wentzel seems to be like the one person. Wentzel and Bernholt are like and the president are like their biggest supporters. Everybody seems to still hate them. And I'm like, they're fighting for you, you bastards. And that's the other thing too. I mean, other than Wentzel and Bernholt and the president, I'm like, you would think more of the military would kind of be understanding or empathetic or get it, but I don't know. What I do know is I'm very curious to see, like, are they going to make it to Morpho next episode? Are they going to have hiccups along the way? Wentzel said the famous line of, oh, we're just 9 minutes away. Nothing's going to get in our way. And I'm like, oh, classic cardinal sin in anime. You're going to get them to have something block their path. But I'm also curious to know if Lena is gathering the 86 that remain. And my question is, she couldn't track them before, so how is she going to figure out where they're at? Like, how's that going to work? She couldn't do it before. How should she do it now? I don't know. They're just going to aimlessly walk till they just happen to stumble across these Yod Federation, like, oh, here you guys are. We've been looking for months. We've just been walking around aimlessly for months and avoiding the Legion somehow. There was also one thing, too, where the president was, one more thing. When the president was, like, talking about the troops and like fighting for the Confederacy and their bright future. We do see the dark-haired guy. He's fascinating to me. I don't know what his angle is. He just looks like a character from a BL series, so maybe that's why I like him so much. But the president's like, you know, we're fighting for the Confederacy and for the Alliance of Wald and for Roa Gracia and any country that wants aid from the Legion. Except San Magnolia. They conveniently leave out San Magnolia. And what's so funny about it is that, yeah, we know San Magnolia is like the worst. We know they're the worst. And they've treated the 86 so badly. But it's one of those weird things that it's like, okay, are you a culture, you know, are you... I don't know. There needs to be a complicated talk there, and I'm hoping that it's coming. Maybe by the end of the season, they're going to kind of hint at it of being like, yes, the 86 have made a declaration throughout this season so far that they are better than San Magnolia, and that they, you know, they forgave Lena. They kind of like got on board with her. They didn't, you know, in the end, they're like, we're better than San Magnolia. We're not going to exclude people and be like them. We're going to take the high road, right? And so if San Magnolia comes asking for aid, are these other countries going to take the high road and recognize that despite, you know, cultural mindsets and despite everything, they're still humans? Or are they going to be like, no, you're pig people. Take this symbolism and reverse Uno card. You guys are all going to die now. Ha, ha, ha. And I'm like, so when the shoe's on the other foot, you know, I just, there's so much potential for this to be very complicated and get complex. And I don't know if the series is going to get that complex with it, but they could. Because, yeah, there's loads of potential to be like, oh, you're not going to help any other country, but you said you'd help any with aid, but is the caveat San Magnolia? But yet you're condemning them for things that you're doing yourself, just in a lesser degree. Shades of gray, right? 50 Shades of Gray. 50 Shades of Sheen, right? I don't know. There's lots of potential for this series to do some really complicated things, and I'm very curious to see if they do it. So we'll see. But I did like this episode a lot. I like Wentzel's character a lot, which I liked Eugene's character a lot too. So hopefully I'm not going to be over. I liked Ray's character a lot too. So I'm 2 for 2 now. Hopefully I'm not going to be 3 for 3. But we'll just have to see. So I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll be back next week with episode 19 of 86. Bye.